My name is Mary, and I'm 42 years old. I've been married to my husband, Charles, for 10 years. When we first met, we worked together, but over time, we found ourselves in different branches of the same company. Charles has always been the responsible, confident one at work. He's well liked by his colleagues, always striving to maintain a strong, ambitious image. I, on the other hand, am quieter and more reserved. So when Charles, with his outgoing personality, showed an interest in me, it came as a surprise. After 3 years of dating, Charles proposed with a lavish bouquet of roses, making me feel incredibly special. I said yes without hesitation, excited about the life we would build together. But soon after, Charles dropped a bombshell. He wanted us to live with his parents. Though hesitant, I agreed, convinced by his reassurances that his parents were welcoming and thrilled about our living situation. Now, 8 years later, I still live in the house where Charles grew up, once his alone, but now shared with his parents. This is not what I had imagined married life would look like. My mornings are consumed by chores, and my mother-in-law's critical eye is always present. No matter how hard I try to prepare a nice breakfast for the family, she finds something to complain about before heading off to work, leaving me to fix whatever's wrong. I feel like little more than a maid. Every day starts at 6 a.m. Managing household tasks and preparing meals, while my mother-in-law stays at home all day and contributes nothing. After a long day at work, I return home to make dinner, and by the time I go to bed, I'm so exhausted that I collapse into sleep. The cycle is never-ending. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law relaxes in the living room, often reminding me to keep everything spotless so that the neighbors will think well of us. Despite the strain on me, my husband is hardly involved in the domestic issues that consume me. My father-in-law, too, remains oblivious, buried in his newspaper, indifferent to the tension in the house. The stress of living with my in-laws has taken a toll on my health. I've lost significant weight, and my menstrual cycle has stopped, leaving us unable to conceive. And even though my mother-in-law is the source of much of my distress, I am blamed for our inability to have children. I used to take pride in my appearance, but now I hardly recognize the woman in the mirror. The constant criticism, combined with my deteriorating health, has led me into a deep depression. I've become so used to yielding to my mother-in-law's demands that I've lost any sense of willpower. Numbed by the weight of it all, leaving seems impossible. The situation worsened when I received tragic news. My father had passed away in an accident. It had been years since I visited my family home, mainly because my husband and mother-in-law disapproved whenever I wanted to. Overcome with guilt for not spending more time with him, I knew I had to attend his funeral. When I told Charles and his mother, their response was cold and dismissive. Before I even finished speaking, they said, "We're not going, let your family handle it." Their heartless reaction left me shaking with grief and anger, but I could only manage a quiet, "Understood." The funeral was crowded with people who had loved my father. He had many connections, and the air was thick with sadness. My mother, who hadn't seen me in years, was visibly shocked by my frail appearance. "Mary, what happened? You look so thin," she said, her voice full of concern. "Are you sick?" Seeing how worn out I looked, she began to cry, fearing she might lose me too. "No, Mom, I'm not sick," I reassured her, though my heart ached. Her concern made me reflect on the last few years, how isolated I'd become, with no real support from Charles or his family. I felt a surge of anger and decided to confide in my mother about the challenges I was facing at home. Living with my in-laws has been harder than I ever expected, especially with all the bullying from my mother-in-law, I admitted. As I spoke, my mother handed me a piece of paper. "Read this, then think carefully about what comes next," she urged. It was my father's will. He'd been meticulous, preparing it just in case. As I read the document, one line caught my eye: a $5 million inheritance. The shock of such a large sum lifted my spirits for the first time in years. I could use this money to finally leave my in-laws' house and start a new life. The thought filled me with hope, and I began to envision a future where I could escape the suffocating grip of my mother-in-law. Back at my in-laws' house, I continued with my daily chores, but now, my mind raced with possibilities for the future. The more I focused on my dreams of independence, the messier the house seemed to get. No one else was stepping up to help, and my thoughts were constantly preoccupied with the inheritance. Despite the tension at home, I still felt a strong desire to stay with Charles, my husband. One evening, After his parents had gone to bed and it was just the two of us, I decided it was time to have an honest conversation. "I need to talk to you about something," I began, breaking the silence. Charles gave me his full attention, his eyes expectant. "It's about my father. I've inherited some money," I said. His curiosity was immediate. "How much?" Charles asked. $5 million, I told him. His eyes widened with surprise, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of excitement. "That's a huge sum," he said. "We should talk about how to use it." Relief washed over me. He seemed open to the conversation. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, to discuss the possibility of moving out and building a life for us. But before I could say anything, Charles interjected with a suggestion that took me completely off guard. "We need to put that money into my mom's account right away," he declared, his tone firm. I stared at him, confused. "Why would we do that? The inheritance is mine, not hers," I said, hoping he was joking. But Charles wasn't laughing. He slammed his hand down on the table. "A wife's money belongs to her mother-in-law," he shouted, his voice filled with anger. His words felt like a slap to the face. I didn't know how to respond. "I don't understand," I stammered, stunned. I had hoped for support and understanding, but Charles was insisting that the money be given to his mother, despite it being my inheritance. That night, I lay awake, unable to sleep, my mind reeling from the conversation. The next morning, while I was making breakfast, Charles and my mother-in-law confronted me. "I heard about the inheritance. Mary, you won't give it to us? Who do you think you are?" my mother-in-law demanded, her voice dripping with anger. Charles was standing beside her, his arms crossed. "It's our money, not just yours. You need to transfer it to my parents' account now," he added, his tone cold. Their determination to take the money was clear. No matter how much I protested, they pressured me relentlessly, until I was too overwhelmed to argue anymore. Then, Charles handed me a piece of paper. "You're getting carried away because of the money. I've been the one supporting you. If you don't change your attitude, I'll file for divorce," he threatened. The paper in his hand was a divorce form, already signed. "Take this and go back to your parents' house," he said coldly. "If you apologize, I might reconsider." Stunned, I took the paper, but a flood of memories hit me. Throughout our marriage, I had never truly received any financial support from Charles or his family. I'd contributed just as much to our living expenses, yet all the household duties fell on me. Despite my constant efforts, I was treated like an outsider. Now, they were even trying to claim my inheritance. The pressure to hand over the money was immense, but suddenly, the idea of leaving seemed like a chance for a fresh start. Holding the divorce papers, I realized I had the power to change my future. I swore to myself that I would never give up my father's legacy. After a long day at work, I went home to my parents' house. "Welcome home, sweetheart," my mother greeted me warmly. Though I was exhausted, a home-cooked meal awaited me, and as I sat down to eat, tears welled up in my eyes. It had been so long since I'd felt cared for in this way. "Did you tell Charles about the inheritance?" my mother asked gently. "I did, and it caused a huge argument," I said, recounting what had happened. My mother listened, stunned by the audacity of Charles and my mother-in-law. "That money is yours, and yours alone. You get to decide what to do with it," she comforted me. After spending a week being cared for at my parents' home, I felt ready to face my in-laws again, but this time, I was different. I was stronger. "I'm heading back now," I said, my voice calm and firm. When I arrived back at the house, Charles and my mother-in-law were waiting for me, their faces set in stern lines. "Have you thought about your behavior?" they demanded. "Yes, I'm sorry, please let me stay," I said, though my apology was more tactical than heartfelt. My mother-in-law's face lit up with satisfaction. "Well then, hand over the inheritance," she said, eager to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. "The process is taking longer than expected," I explained. "I haven't even received it yet. It's complicated, and it could take up to 7 months. 7 months? My mother-in-law looked disappointed but reluctantly accepted the news. Charles seemed satisfied, thinking their plan was still intact, but I knew better. I wouldn't give in to their demands. Instead, I bided my time. The days that followed were filled with more of the same pressure. "The house is a mess. You need to clean it up," they would demand, despite the fact that they hadn't lifted a finger to help. At one point, my mother-in-law declared, "I'm going on a trip for my birthday. Make sure the house is clean when I get back. She always celebrated without inviting me, of course. Charles then casually asked, "Have you received the inheritance yet? It should be coming today." His comment, almost too conveniently timed with his mother's birthday, didn't go unnoticed. "Don't forget to transfer it to Mom's account before we get back," my mother-in-law added. As soon as they left, I smiled to myself. I had been planning this for a while, and now was the time to put my plan into action. I packed my things, leaving behind the house that had never truly been mine. Moving into my new home, I felt a surge of excitement. My father's inheritance had made this possible. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of my newfound freedom. I invited my mother to join me, and together, we settled into my beautiful new home, a place I could finally call my own, far from the oppressive control of my in-laws. As I sank into the plush sofa, I felt peace settle over me, a contentment I hadn't known in years. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. To celebrate this new chapter, my mother and I treated ourselves to a day of indulgence. We hired a chef to cook a delicious meal for us, making the day feel truly special. The following evening, my phone rang. It was Charles, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. "What's going on? Where are you?" he demanded, clearly confused by the emptiness of the house. "I'm not coming back, goodbye," I said firmly, intending to put an end to the conversation. But before I could hang up, my mother-in-law's voice blared through the phone. "Where are you? What are you doing?" she shouted. "I packed my things and left, just like you asked me to clean the house," I replied, keeping my voice calm and steady. "This isn't funny, and what about the inheritance? How many times do I have to say it? Your money belongs to me," she screamed. I couldn't keep my composure any longer. "Well, I'm single now, you know," I shot back, my patience wearing thin. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Single?" she repeated, her voice laced with confusion. "Yes, I'm divorced. I signed the papers and submitted them. I'm a stranger to you now. Goodbye," I said, hanging up abruptly. I couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of their shocked faces. The relief of being free from that controlling family was immeasurable. In the days that followed, Charles bombarded me with calls. Whenever I had a moment, I answered, letting him and my mother-in-law hurl insults at me while I calmly ignored them. I made sure to record every call for my own peace of mind. With the recordings in hand, I decided to take action. I went to the police, knowing that harassment from an ex-spouse can escalate, and I didn't want to leave anything to chance. They acted swiftly, visiting my ex-husband's family to make it clear that their behavior would not be tolerated. The police visit had an immediate effect. My ex-in-laws, who were obsessed with maintaining their public image, were shaken by the sight of officers at their doorstep. Word spread quickly, especially when one of Charles's colleagues, who didn't have the best opinion of him, witnessed the visit. Soon, rumors began swirling about Charles's behavior, and the gossip reached my department. "Did you hear about the police at Charles's house?" my colleagues whispered. "I'm divorced now, so I'm out of the loop," I said loudly enough for them to hear, knowing the rumor would spread even further. As expected, the gossip quickly reached Charles's boss. "Have you heard what's been going around?" his boss said during a tense meeting. Charles, taken aback, could only respond, "What are you talking about? These rumors are damaging, and I can't tolerate a man who doesn't appreciate his wife." His boss continued, "You're a liability to the company, and this situation is tarnishing our reputation. I'm transferring you." The news hit like a thunderclap. Charles was relocated to a branch office in a remote area, often referred to as a dead end. He had no say in the matter. His career, once on an upward trajectory, had been derailed by the rumors and his treatment of me. As for my mother-in-law, the shock of losing her son's support and seeing his reputation unravel took a heavy toll on her. Her emotional state worsened, and she began showing signs of depression and even dementia-like behavior. Her condition worsened to the point where she became a significant burden on my ex-father-in-law, who was now her primary caregiver. In private, my ex-father-in-law often sighed, "Even without blood ties, a daughter-in-law is still a valuable member of the family." The struggles my former in-laws faced felt like karmic retribution for the way they had treated me. While their world crumbled, my new life was just beginning. I moved in with my mother, and we began a new hobby, gardening in our spacious backyard. It was a joy I had never experienced before, one that had been impossible in the oppressive environment of my in-laws' home. Gardening revitalized not just my spirit but also my health, which had suffered under the constant stress I endured. I felt deep gratitude every day for the choice I had made to leave that life behind. I had found true peace and happiness in my new life, living with my mother, far removed from the toxicity of my former in-laws. My future was mine to shape, and I was finally free to live it on my terms.